Second Lieutenant David Woods, non-commissioned officer in charge of Sergeant Rodney S. Williamson. The United States Continental Army Band, of the commander, Captain Timothy J. Holden, the drum major is Staff Sergeant William B. King. The 8th Transportation Brigade, commanded by Colonel Arthur L. Breithaupt, Command Sergeant Major John T. Cressley. 8th Transportation Brigade was reactivated 26 July 1986 at Fort Eustis. Their mission is to train the finest soldiers, non-commissioned officers, and enlisted soldiers for the Army of the 21st century and beyond. A combat force multiplier without parallel. 1st Battalion, 222nd Aviation Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Mark C. Bingaman, Command Sergeant Major 1st Sergeant Mary M. Edwards. Alpha Company, commanded by 1st Lieutenant Anil Chaudhry, 1st Sergeant Drill Sergeant, Sergeant 1st Class Todd Moen. Bravo Company, commanded by Captain David E. Weber, 1st Sergeant Drill Sergeant, Sergeant 1st Class James Franklin. Charlie Company, commanded by 1st Lieutenant Louis C. Barraza, 1st Sergeant Drill Sergeant, Staff Sergeant Elmer H. Bayer. Delta Company, commanded by Captain Ramon George, 1st Sergeant Terrence L. Grody. 71st Transportation Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Donald H. Horner, Jr., Command Sergeant Major William J. Reed. Headquarters and Headquarters Company, 8th Transportation Brigade, commanded by Captain Mark Wolf, 1st Sergeant Michael Almodovar. Echo Company, commanded by Captain Bradley Balcom, 1st Sergeant Tony Baker. Gulf Company, commanded by Captain Frank E. Hanner, 1st Sergeant Rufus M. Brown, Jr. India Company, commanded by Captain Gregory L. Peacock, 1st Sergeant Thomas L. Dawkins. Aye, right. 765th Transportation Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel James F. Bowie, Command Sergeant Major Frank Campbell. Headquarters Company, United States Army Transportation Center, commanded by Captain Nolan Sessions, 1st Sergeant, Sergeant 1st Class Promotable Lester H. Reed. First Staff and Faculty Company, commanded by Captain Dana Smith, 1st Sergeant Stephen Punter. Third Staff and Faculty Company, commanded by Captain James G. Henslin, 1st Sergeant Ronald Bretsky. Military Police Company, commanded by Captain Jorge Figueroa Cruz, 1st Sergeant Rodney McCoy. The United States Army Center of Transportation Non-Commissioned Officers Academy, Commandant Command Sergeant Major Martin K. Hartfield, 1st Sergeant Timothy R. Burton. We proudly salute the United States Army Transportation Center Non-Commissioned Officers Academy, recognized to display battalion organizational colors effective 15 August in 97. Commemorates 12 years of conducting professional development training, producing the finest squad leaders and platoon sergeants in the Army, trained to lead. That was the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officer Course, Transportation and Aviation Branch, Branch Chief Master Sergeant Herbert J. Austin. Basic Non-Commissioned Officer Course, Transportation Branch, Branch Chief Master Sergeant Walter Sherrod, Jr. Basic Non-Commissioned Officer Course, Aviation Branch Chief Sergeant First Class Carl Stover. The United States Army Transportation Regimental Color Guard from the 7th Transportation Group. Color Guard Sergeant is Sergeant Staff Sergeant Anthony Perez. 7th Transportation Group, commanded by Colonel Bradley E. Smith, Command Sergeant Major Frank L. Reeves. We salute the 7th Transportation Group Composite, commemorating 33 years of continuous active service since its reactivation 4 July 1966. Resident, the 6th Transportation Battalion, commanded by Major Jeffrey B. Helmick, Command Sergeant Major Jerry L. Reed. Headquarters and Headquarters Company, commanded by Captain Kurt Borman, First Sergeant Gilbert Atkins. The 89th Transportation Company, commanded by Captain Jonathan D. Biggert, First Sergeant, Sergeant First Class Ronald Porter. 331st Transportation Company, commanded by Captain Edward L. English, First Sergeant Jeffrey Skinner. Aye. 558th Transportation Company, commanded by First Lieutenant Christopher C. Duncan, First Sergeant Gene Hammond. 10th Transportation Battalion, commanded by Major Edward G. McKinley, Command Sergeant Major Harvey L. Howell. Headquarters and Headquarters Company, commanded by Captain Jason T. Strickland, First Sergeant Robin T. Epps. Right. 73rd Transportation Company, commanded by Captain Russell M. Long, First Sergeant Roscoe M. Eubanks. Eyes right. 97th Transportation Company, commanded by Captain Charles E. Thompson, First Sergeant James J. Green. Eyes right. 155 Transportation Company, commanded by Captain Clifford M. Surway, First Sergeant, Sergeant First Class Cedric Thomas. The 11th Transportation Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Timothy McNulty, Command Sergeant Major Richard W. Woods. Right. 19th Quartermaster Company, commanded by Captain Stephen V. Prey, First Sergeant James R. Deatley. Right. 119th Transportation Company, commanded by Captain Michael L. Johnson, First Sergeant Lynette F. Harper. Right. 159th Transportation Company, commanded by Captain Douglas M. Harrison, First Sergeant John R. Brown. 309th Transportation Company, commanded by First Lieutenant David L. Kerman, First Sergeant, Sergeant First Class Kevin A. McKellar. Right. 24th Transportation Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Stephen J. Garris, Command Sergeant Major Master Sergeant Mary D. Smith. Headquarters and Headquarters Company, commanded by Captain Shea V. Coates, First Sergeant Marvin L. Hatcher. The 8th Transportation Company, commanded by Second Lieutenant Richard D. Helling, First Sergeant Deborah M. Long.
Eyes right!
329th Transportation Company, commanded by Captain William T. Draper, First Sergeant Daniel L. Reed.
Eyes right!
567th Transportation Company, commanded by Captain Michael L. Arnold, First Sergeant First Class Randall C. Higgins.
Eyes right!
I borrow a phrase from the commander of 7th Transportation Group. Nobody does what we do. We are the Transportation Corps, spearhead of logistics. Ha! Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you now to please rise as we play the Transportation Corps song and the Army song. United States Continental Army Band of Fort Monroe, Virginia, led off the field by the Drum Major Staff Sergeant William King. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the regimental review. Please be seated until the reviewing party departs, and please delay extending your personal congratulations until that time. We invite you to please attend the distinguished member of the regiment reception here on Murphy Field, under the shade of the colorful canopy to your left on the field. And we invite you to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony of Fort Eustis Club starting at 11 o'clock. We thank you very, very much for your attendance here on this warm July day, 1999. We wish you safe passage as you return to your homes and extend to you best wishes for having a happy day.